I'm interested in that data as well. I mean, if there's a way, I think that'd be really important information to have in order to make informed judgments about what works and what doesn't work and what's cost effective. I think we all understand the critical role that education plays in our modern society and how important it is that we continue to expand the opportunity for more Americans, and I think that the tax code can and has played a role in that. I think the question is if the tax system is the appropriate place from which to expand access to education, and if these subsidies are really truly benefiting students, or are they just structured primarily to benefit the educational institutions. It seems to me at least that's given the critical importance of education, that these are questions that really need to be explored, and certainly as part of fundamental tax reform if we ever get there. I am interested in asking the question the chairman was asking maybe a slightly different way, but between these various incentives that exist in the tax code today to help Americans afford higher education, you've got provisions to help Americans save for college, provisions to help Americans deal with the debt associated with the college education, some incentives to help Americans afford higher education. I'm interested in drilling down a little bit more on the question of which of these categories of tax benefits are most cost effective to the federal government. And again, that gets maybe back at the previous question, that really needs more of a analysis of the data to come to that conclusion. But if we could only choose one of these incentives, which is the one that you think would be the one that we would want to put our resources and our effort behind, and why? I just throw that question open. Mr. White.
I will start, and I think part of the problem here is that we are spending tens of billions of dollars on these programs, and we don't know the answer to the question you're asking. Some of these programs do serve different purposes. Some are effectively grants. The credits and deductions are providing money right now to pay for current expenses. Other programs are assisting with paying off loans, which is a different sort of assistance. But we don't know what the effect of these different kinds of programs is. We don't adequately understand. There is some research that's been done, but it's limited. We don't understand how effective those programs are at things that we want to accomplish, such as increasing college attendance by students who would not otherwise have gone to college.
Mr. Chairman, is that something that we could ask the GAO to do?
We can ask them to do whatever we want.
Okay, well, good.
I'd like to point out, actually, that the Department of Education is right now fielding 2 experiments that will answer some of these questions. They're about to start some experiments that would look at the effect of the Pell Grant as well as the education savings incentives. So at least we're moving in the direction of getting answers to some of these questions.
Yeah. Let me ask Mr. Hodge, there are a number of us on this committee I think have been surprised to learn that roughly half of all Americans don't pay federal income tax at all because they don't have an income tax liability. And what's your thoughts and your opinion as to what extent the tax benefits in the Code for Education contribute to that?
Well, it has not been the driving force. Obviously, the child credit, the earned income tax credit, making work pay, all these others are the bigger factors. But this is certainly a factor. And, certainly the American Opportunity Credit has been a big part of that. I was troubled to read the Inspector General report, which found as much as $3.2 billion in erroneous payments under the American Opportunity Credit in the last year. So these programs are ripe for fraud, in addition to the fact that they are knocking people off the tax rolls. But to answer your previous question, I would think the only one of these, or the only provisions that we're talking about here that are consistent with fundamental tax reform are the savings provisions, the 529 plans and the IRAs. Because even under fundamental tax reform, we wouldn't want to encourage savings. And I would not try to pigeonhole savings into various buckets that we choose, such as health insurance or housing or so forth, but to encourage savings for whatever a family's needs may be. But certainly education would be a big part of that. And so all of these other credits do violate the basic principles of fundamental tax reform and basic principles of tax policy. But on the other hand, the savings provisions are fully consistent with that and things that we would want to encourage. It's better to encourage people to save for college rather than to mortgage their future with all of these loans, which too many Americans now, I think the outstanding loan debt in America is now over $1 trillion, which is greater than all of the consumer debt that's out there. We are facing the same kind of bubble in student loans that we have seen in housing, and that is a very troubling turn of events.
I'd just like to add to that that I agree it's important to encourage savings, but I think we should be clear about that savings policy and not to college education policy. We basically don't have any evidence that these programs increase college going. And the people who take up the 529 plan, the Coverdell, are very high income families. Their children go to college at rates well north of 90%, and providing tax savings incentives for them is not going to increase education levels.
And final question, I guess maybe this was addressed earlier, but did we sort of establish in response to some of the questions that were raised earlier that some of these subsidies for education are contributing to the higher cost of college education? Was that sort of agreed upon point?
No. That was a disagreed upon
It was
point.
discussed.
Okay. Good. Well, I'll go back and read the transcript to figure out who agreed and who disagreed. But anyway, this is if we get to fundamental tax reform, obviously something that will be hopefully included, an element of that, and hopefully by then we'll have some of the information that will give greater clarity, at least, to what works, what doesn't work, what's a good return for the taxpayer, and so I look forward to that. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.